This month's Look Behind the Curtain exposes the who, when, and why the usage of the term race included classifying people by their melanin or lack thereof. But for those not familiar with melanin beyond its association with skin color, according to Dr. Laila Afrika, who holds a doctorate in health and nutrition, he states that the pigment melanin is part of the nervous system in the brain and is basically the chemical key to life. In some scientific communities, melanin is called the civilizing chemical because it regulates all the rhythms in your body. No, not that kind of rhythm. Ooh, okay, that was creepy. And I do apologize to any small children in the audience. Now, the rhythms associated with melanin synchronizes all the natural functions in your body. For example, but certainly not limited to, when your eyebrows should grow, when a boy reaches puberty and become a man, when a girl starts her cycle and become a woman, and times when your heart and liver should be fed. Now, those are just a few rhythms associated with melanin. I highly encourage you to learn more about melanin, its functions, and benefits to a better health. In our fact-finding quest, we will explore the following talking points. 1. The evolution of the term race. 2. The who, when, and why skin classification originated. And lastly, using the book of Genesis as a historical source, we will learn if the ancient civilizations classified people by skin color, and if not, then how. Now, we are aware that the English term race has several meanings, including classifying people by skin color. But when did race begin to refer to skin classification? And what happened in history that caused that change? And why did it happen? To learn the earliest written usage of a modern English word, I use a free online etymological dictionary of the English language, such as the one at etymolonline.com. Now, etymologies are not definitions. They explain what modern English words meant 600 or 200 years ago. Now, the earliest recording of the term race is Rasen in 1200 AD and from a Scandinavian word and means to rush. Now, in 1300 AD, race meant act of running, and it's from an Old Norse word, ras, as in rush of water, and it became a general English word in 1550. In 1757, race meant run swiftly. Now hang in there, there's a point to this tracking. In 1809, race meant run in competition against. And in 1862, race was referred to an engine running. However, in the 16th century, race from Middle French meant people of common descent, breed, lineage, family. Now, in addition, the etymology also explained that in 1774, the modern meaning is one of the great divisions of mankind based on physical characteristics. Now, the tracking of the term race established that a new usage for race, grouping people by skin hue, was added in the 16th century, which in fact is the beginning of the modern time period. Our next question to ask: what event or series of events occurred in the 16th century or thereabout, causing the new meaning to be added. Now, this is where my research really got interesting. Here's the warp speed version of the series of events that caused the term race to include classifying people by skin color in modern times. Enjoy. Starting in the 14th century, the descendants of the people who invaded Europe in the 5th century, known as Indo-Europeans, began to dominate and overthrow the melanated English and British nobles in the 14th century. And if that wasn't enough, they didn't just take over the throne, they became them. The monarchy of Europe today did not exist 600 years ago. Here in the West, we were taught that these wars were a series of civil and religious motivated wars in Britain. However, the part that was conveniently omitted was that these wars were race wars, and we know who won, which is why you don't know this. Next, I present to you a few images of the sovereign melanated people of Europe before the time of their domination by non-melanated elites. Now, the British Museum Archive has hundreds of small prints, engravings, sketchings, and studies of melanated people in England from the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and early modern eras. I plan to include more in my upcoming book titled, Who the North American Negroes Really Are. This is an original portrait of Marion III. Now, Marion III was a king of Carthage, which is modern Georgia, a contemporary to the Roman Emperor Constantine in 306 to 337 AD. Carthage was the successor state of the ancient kingdom of Colchis and the United Kingdom of Eastern Iberia. Now, historian Herodotus described the people as having black skin and woolly hair. This is Edith of England and Otto I, the Holy Roman Emperor. They were married in 929 AD. Now, Otto I became the Holy Roman Emperor upon his father's death, King Charlemagne, and yes, he was a melanated man too. This is King and Saint Stephen I on his throne. This portrait is from the Chronicon Pictum, which is the 14th century collection. The Chronicon Pictum is a medieval illustrated chronicles from the Kingdom of Hungary from the second half of the 14th century. King Stephen I was crowned on 25th December, the year 1000, after succeeding his father in 997 AD. The cameos featuring detailed profiles of heavily melanated women in precious metals and jewels were popular in many European countries. These are dated circa 1600 to 1800. Some art historians relate them to the association of blackness and wealth that came through trade in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Now, this ends the first talking point. To summarize, we learned that the earlier usage of the term, the English word race, originated in the 13th and 14th century from a Scandinavian word and later from an Old Norse word. They are of the Germanic language family and were of an ancient melanated stock. 2. During the 13th century through the 19th century, race did not refer to people. 3. Up until the 19th century, the sovereigns of Europe were melanated people. However, beginning in the 16th century, the word began to include a new usage referring to people, breed, lineage, and skin color classification. This is due in part to the domination that was occurring at that time. This ends talking point 1. Next, our second talking point. Who's responsible for classifying people based upon their hue or their melanin and other physical characteristics? So a question to consider is, can the origin of classifying people by melanin be traced back to an individual or an individual representing a specific group? Our answer? Emphatically, yes. Now, of course, for this to have occurred, the individual must have been in a position of influence and his peers in a position of authority. Wouldn't you think? Now, according to the encyclopedia.com and a 1935 Columbia Encyclopedia, there were several attempts to classify people by skin hue when? In the 1700s. Very good. You are listening. And they were all from the same ethnicity. For the sake of time, I will be presenting just 2. One of the first classification attempts was made by Swedish-born Carl Linné, a Swedish botanist and considered by his peers as the father of taxonomy in 1758. In his work, he followed both continental geography and a color scheme that divided man into white European, dark Asiatic, red American, and black Negro. His peers stated that many of the characters he used to classify his races were quite subjective and unscientific. Next, according to a 1935 Columbia Encyclopedia, it was the theory of German anthropologist Johann Blumenbach's 5 divisions or types of human races, which was the foundation of all future classifications. Now, like Linné and other theorists, all they served to prove was that people of color were the majority on the planet. Anywho, I like to read an excerpt from a book titled From Babylon to Timbuktu by author researcher Rudolf Windsor, published in 1988, regarding his findings on Johann Blumenbach. Page 21, and I quote, "In the 17th century and later, Europe began to emerge out of the sloth of ignorance, and certain Germans and others conceived of themselves as belonging to a superior race. Johann F. Blumenbach, a German, was the first to divide humanity on the basis of skin color. His classification set up a color line to the detriment of later generations. Mr. Blumenbach classified 5 chief races of mankind: the Caucasians, the Mongolian, the Ethiopians, the American Indians, and Malayans. Now, moreover, he considered the Caucasians to be the original race. Blumenbach named the whites after the Caucasus Mountains, situated between the Black and the Caspian Seas. Now, because he thought the purest white people originated there." And I end quote. This ends my talking point number 2. I could just stop right here and consider our quest completed. Now, we now have the when, where, who, and why regarding our topic, who told you that you were black and who told you that you were white. However, it's only prudent to perform our due diligence and leave no stone unturned. Yes, even in 30 minutes. So let's summarize what we just learned before moving to our last talking point. Did the ancient world classify people by skin color? We learned in talking point 2, between 2 encyclopedias and the findings of author researcher Rudolf Windsor, that there were at least 4 attempts made in the 17th and 18th century to classify people by their skin hue or melanin. However, Johann Blumenbach, a modern German anthropologist, was credited as being the first to divide humanity based upon skin color. Now, Blumenbach and certain other Germans and elites believed they belonged to a superior race. In other words, they thought that it was best to have very little chemical of life called melanin, not to mention the fact that they had no say-so in the matter. There must be more to this melanin than we were led to believe. And lastly, Blumenberg is credited for naming the whites after the Caucasus Mountain. Now, I like to read the actual comments of another certain European American elite who agrees that whites are a superior race. I present to you Mr. Benjamin Franklin, one of the so-called founding fathers of a country already populated with civilized copper-colored races. Though Benjamin Franklin's comments are certainly those of a white supremacist, I can appreciate his sharing them. I really can. He also describes the skin hues of other Europeans, Americans, and Africans in a 1755 Boston publication titled Observations Concerning the Increase of Man, Peopling of Countries by Benjamin Franklin, and we will read from the last paragraph, number 24. Which leads me to add one remark, that the number of purely white people in the world is proportionally very small. All Africa is black or tawny, and tawny means Asia, chiefly tawny or dark. America, exclusive of the newcomers, wholly so. So the inhabitants of America, very dark. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion. As are the Germans also. So let's see, Mr. Franklin, you are saying that the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, Swedes, and Germans were dark, melanated people. Let's continue. The Saxons, only excepted, who with the English make the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. So he is classifying white people in two categories, Saxons and the English. I could wish these numbers were increased. And while we are, as I may call it, scouring our planet for clearing America of woods, and so making this side of our globe reflect a brighter light to the eyes of inhabitants in Mars or Venus. Now, I know what you're thinking. No, he wasn't crazy. He was very much into metaphysics, and there's a way more study to what he just said, and it'll make sense once you have the information. But I do want to go on to add that he says the eyes of inhabitants in Mars or Venus, not on them as if they are planets, because he's not talking about planets because they were never planets. When he says in, he is talking about in a dimension. But again, oh yeah, that's going to take a study for another time. So why should we, in the sight of superior beings who are in this plane of Mars and Venus, darken its people? And why increase? Oh, what do you mean by that? Why should these purely white people intermix with the melanated people of this planet. Why would they do that? Why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America? Why are you going to increase these dark people, bring them over here when there's already black people here? Why would we do that? This is what he is saying. To continue. Where we have so fair an opportunity by excluding all blacks and tawnies, all black and brownish people, of increasing the lovely white and red. Now, I'm not sure what the red people he meant by that. But perhaps I am partial to the complexion of my country. You know what I like to ask, Benjamin, where's your country? Because the original people of Europe were melanated people. Now, okay, I will say this. Even from the conception of that land, there were several types of people there. So I will state that. But that land was inherited by melanated people. And that information can be found in the book of the biblical narrative called Genesis, among also the English translated book of Jubilees as well. But maybe we'll get to that in another topic. To continue, for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind. And that ends the quote for Benjamin Franklin. And I do thank you, Mr. Franklin, for your words and your insight and your enlightenment. I really do. And thank you for that. So we have our who and the why melanated people know themselves as black and non-melanated people know themselves as white, largely due to an ideal originated with white supremacists in modern Europe after the Renaissance. Since the evidence is clear and answers today's look behind the curtain topic, I decided not to include the last talking point as originally planned to show that the ancient civilized people, who were melanated people, did not classify people by skin color, though they were aware of people without melanin. The ancients knew one another by their national or tribal names. But I will save that topic for another discussion. That being said, this ends the presentation portion. I now yield the floor to you.